It came from outer space and it couldn't be stopped. No bullets, no fire, nothing worked. The Blob wasn't just a monster movie. It was an accident that became a cult classic. A film where the star got paid almost nothing, the crew used real fire departments, and the creature itself, it was made from silicone and red dye that kept breaking apart between takes. These are 20 weird facts about the Blob. And the bonus? The theme song became a top 40 hit that nobody saw coming. Let's dive in before this thing consumes everything. Number 1. Steve McQueen was already 27 years old when he played a teenager in The Blob, and he knew it looked ridiculous. Fresh off television work and desperate for his first major film role, McQueen took the part of Steve Andrews despite being nearly a decade older than his character. He later called it one of the most embarrassing roles of his career, not because the film was bad, but because he felt absurd pretending to be a high schooler when he had crow's feet and a receding hairline. During filming, the crew would joke about his age, asking if he needed reading glasses for his lines or a walker between takes. McQueen didn't laugh. He was serious about his craft, even in a B-movie about alien goo. But the paycheck was insulting. He earned just $3,000 for the lead role, a fraction of what supporting actors were making on major studio pictures. His agent tried to negotiate more, but the producer said take it or leave it. McQueen took it, figuring any screen time was better than none. He had no idea the film would become a classic, or that decades later, people would still quote his lines and remember his face covered in terror as the Blob consumed everything around him. Number 2. The Blob wasn't originally called The Blob. Early drafts of the script used the title The Molten Meteor, a name that sounded more like a rejected science textbook than a horror film. Producers hated it. They wanted something simple, something that stuck in your brain like gum on a shoe. So they brainstormed dozens of alternatives. The Glob, the Mass, the Thing that ate everything, all terrible. Then someone in the room, accounts vary on who, just blurted out, The Blob. Silence. Everyone stared. It was stupid. It was childish. It was perfect. The name had a visceral quality, something primal and unsettling despite its simplicity. You couldn't forget it, even if you tried. The studio tested the title with focus groups, and audiences responded immediately. Kids loved it, adults remembered it, even critics, who would later pan the film, admitted the title was brilliant in its stupidity. But changing the name mid-production caused chaos. Marketing materials had already been printed with The Molten Meteor plastered across posters. Props and signage had to be redone. The theme song, already recorded, had to be re-recorded with new lyrics. It cost the production thousands of extra dollars they didn't have. But it worked. The Blob became iconic not just because of what it was, but because of what it was called. Number 3. The Blob itself was a nightmare to work with. It wasn't a single prop or a mechanical effect. It was silicone mixed with red vegetable dye, poured into different molds and shapes depending on the scene, and it never behaved the way the crew wanted. In some takes, it would ooze perfectly, sliding across the floor like a living organism. In others, it would break apart, leaving chunks of red goo scattered across the set that had to be scraped up and remixed. The temperature had to be precisely controlled. Too hot, and the silicone would become runny and lose its form. Too cold, and it would solidify into a useless lump. The crew spent hours between shots, adjusting heating lamps, fans, and thermometers, just to get the Blob to move at the right speed. Actors hated working with it. The dye stained their clothes, their hands, even their hair. Annetta Corso, who played Steve's girlfriend Jane, had to throw away 3 dresses after shooting because the red dye wouldn't wash out. The smell was worse. Silicone mixed with vegetable dye created a chemical odor that clung to the set for weeks. Cast members complained of headaches and nausea, but on screen, it worked. The Blob looked alien, unpredictable, and genuinely frightening, all because it was genuinely unpredictable. Number 4. The movie's most iconic scene almost never happened. When the Blob attacks the movie theater and panicked townspeople flee into the streets, that wasn't filmed on a closed set with extras. It was filmed during an actual Friday night in downtown Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. The producers couldn't afford to rent the theater or hire hundreds of extras, so they made a deal with the theater owner. They would stage a real screening of a real movie, Daughter of Horror, and at a predetermined moment, the staff would trigger the fire alarm. The audience had no idea they were about to become part of a film. When the alarm sounded, chaos erupted. People screamed, pushed toward the exits, trampled over each other in confusion. Cameras hidden on rooftops and in storefronts captured every second. Some audience members figured it out quickly and started playing along, throwing their hands up dramatically and running in exaggerated terror. Others were genuinely frightened, convinced something terrible was happening. One woman reportedly had a panic attack and had to be calmed down by theater staff. The producers never told anyone in advance because they wanted authentic fear, real confusion. It was guerrilla filmmaking at its most reckless. Today, it would be illegal, a lawsuit waiting to happen. But in 1958, they got away with it, and the result is one of the most memorable sequences in B-movie history. Number 5. Steve McQueen wasn't the first choice for the lead. The role of Steve Andrews was originally offered to a young actor named Robert Altman, no relation to the famous director. He had done theater work, a few television spots, and seemed perfect for the part. Clean-cut, charming, exactly what the producers envisioned. But Altman had one condition. He wanted script approval. He wanted to rewrite some of his dialogue, make the character more nuanced, less of a cookie-cutter teen hero. The producers laughed in his face. This was a B-movie about killer space jelly. There would be no script approval, no rewrites, no creative input. Altman walked, and the producers panicked. They had already scheduled shooting locations, hired crew, locked in the release date. They needed someone fast. McQueen's agent called them out of desperation. He was older, sure, but he had screen presence and he'd work cheap. They met McQueen once, asked him to read 2 pages of dialogue, and cast him on the spot. He showed up the next day, ready to shoot. No rehearsals, no costume fittings, just work. And despite his later regrets about the role, McQueen's performance is what makes the film watchable. He played it straight, never winking at the camera, treating the absurdity with genuine intensity. That commitment, even in a movie this ridiculous, is what turned him into a star. Number 6. The film's director, Irvin Yeworth Jr., was better known for directing religious films than horror. Before The Blob, he'd made dozens of educational shorts and faith-based features for churches and Christian organizations. He had never worked on a horror film, never dealt with special effects, never directed action sequences. The producers hired him because he was cheap and available, not because he was qualified. But Yeworth brought something unexpected to the project. He treated the material seriously. While other B-movie directors of the era leaned into camp and absurdity, Yeworth directed The Blob like it was a real thriller. He used shadows, slow builds, long takes that created tension. He studied Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window and The Birds, borrowing techniques from the master of suspense. His religious background also influenced the film's themes. The Blob isn't just a monster. It's a metaphor for unstoppable consumption, for sin spreading through a community, for the consequences of ignoring warnings until it's too late. Yeworth later said he saw the film as a morality tale disguised as a creature feature. Not everyone bought that interpretation. Critics dismissed it as pretentious nonsense. But Yeworth's seriousness is exactly what makes The Blob work. He never lets the audience off the hook with humor or irony. The threat feels real because he directs it like it's real. And that earnestness, that refusal to mock his own material, is what separates The Blob from hundreds of other forgotten monster movies. Number 7. The opening credits almost got the film banned. When The Blob premiered, it opened with an upbeat, jazzy theme song that sounds nothing like a horror movie. Beware of The Blob. It creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor. It's catchy, playful, completely at odds with the terror that follows. Audiences in test screenings were confused. Some laughed, thinking it was a comedy. Others felt cheated, like they'd been sold a lie. The studio executives panicked and considered cutting the song entirely, replacing it with traditional horror music. But someone had a different idea. What if they leaned into the contrast? What if the cheerful song made the horror more disturbing by comparison? They kept it, and something unexpected happened. The song became a hit. Radio stations started playing it. Kids sang it at school. Burt Bacharach, yes, that Burt Bacharach, wrote the music with Mac David handling the lyrics. It climbed to number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100, unheard of for a horror movie theme. The song gave the film a life beyond theaters. People who never saw the movie knew the song. It became a cultural touchstone, referenced in other films, covered by other artists, parodied endlessly. But the controversy didn't end there. Some religious groups claimed the upbeat tone was inappropriate, that it glorified violence and made horror seem fun for children. A few theaters in the South refused to play the film because of the song alone. The producers didn't care. The controversy was free publicity, and the song was selling tickets. Number 8. One of the film's most expensive shots cost almost nothing to make. When the blob consumes the Colonial Theater and oozes out through the projection booth, the effect looks massive, like gallons of silicone pouring through the building. In reality, it was less than 5 pounds of material filmed from multiple angles and reversed in post-production. The crew built a miniature version of the theater's projection room, about 3 feet tall, and carefully poured the blob mixture through tiny openings. They filmed it at high speed, then slowed down the footage in editing to make it look heavier and more menacing. The trick worked so well that audiences assumed it was filmed at full scale with a massive crew. But the whole sequence took less than 4 hours to shoot and cost under $200 in materials. The producers used this technique throughout the film, relying on clever camera work and editing rather than expensive effects. They didn't have a choice. The budget was so tight that every dollar mattered, but necessity bred creativity. The Blob's low-budget effects have aged better than many big-budget films from the same era because they relied on practical techniques, camera angles, and lighting rather than flashy gimmicks. What looks cheap in one context looks inventive in another, and The Blob, for all its limitations, looks inventive. The crew made something memorable out of almost nothing, and that resourcefulness shows in every frame. Number 9. The film's teenage cast wasn't actually filled with teenagers. Steve McQueen was 27, but he wasn't alone. Annetta Corsott, who played Jane Martin, was 25. Earl Rowe, who played her younger brother Danny, was actually 23. The entire teen cast was in their 20s, and it showed. They didn't move like teenagers, didn't talk like teenagers, didn't even look like teenagers. But the producers didn't care. They needed actors who could deliver lines convincingly and work long hours without labor law restrictions. Actual teenagers came with problems. Limited shooting hours, required on-set tutors, legal guardians hovering around union rules. It was easier and cheaper to cast adults. The disconnect created an unintentional effect. The teenagers in The Blob act more mature, more capable than typical horror movie teens. They don't make stupid decisions or ignore obvious danger. They think, plan, try to get help from adults who won't listen. That maturity makes the film's themes sharper. This isn't a movie about dumb kids getting punished for bad behavior. It's about competent young people facing a threat that adults refuse to acknowledge until it's too late. The casting accident turned into thematic gold. And modern audiences, watching the film decades later, often don't notice the age issue because everyone in 1,950 seconds films looked older than their characters. Hair, makeup, wardrobe, they all aged people up. So a 7-year-old playing 17 didn't stand out the way it would today. Number 10. The Blob's weakness, extreme cold, was added at the last minute. The original script had no clear way to stop the creature. It just kept growing, consuming everything, until the military dropped a nuclear bomb on the town. Everyone died. The Blob survived. The end. Test audiences hated it. They wanted a solution, a victory, something hopeful. The producers scrambled for alternatives. Someone suggested acid. Another pitched electricity. Nothing felt right. Then, during a late-night writing session, one of the producers mentioned that silicone, the actual material they were using for the Blob, became brittle in cold temperatures. What if that was the answer? What if the Blob couldn't handle freezing? They rewrote the ending in 48 hours, added the fire extinguisher sequence, and filmed it with barely any preparation. The actors improvised most of their dialogue because the script pages were still wet with ink, but it worked. The cold weakness gave the film a logical, almost scientific conclusion. It turned a nihilistic horror story into a thriller with a solution. Audiences cheered when Steve McQueen grabbed that fire extinguisher and froze the Blob solid. They left theaters satisfied, not traumatized. And that ending, rushed and improvised as it was, became one of the most iconic moments in 1,950 seconds sci-fi horror. Because sometimes the best ideas don't come from careful planning, they come from panic, necessity, and a producer who remembered that silicone doesn't like winter. Number 11. The police officers in the film were played by actual police officers from Phoenixville. The producers couldn't afford to hire professional actors for every role, so they made a deal with the local police department. Officers would appear in uniform, deliver a few lines, and get paid $50 each plus free meals during shooting. Most had never acted before, never been on a film set, never spoken scripted dialogue, and it showed. Their line delivery was stiff, awkward, completely unconvincing. Director Irvin Yeworth tried coaching them, running through takes dozens of times, but nothing improved. They spoke like they were reading from a teleprompter, all inflection gone. Then Yeworth had an idea. What if that was perfect? What if skeptical, bureaucratic cops should sound exactly like this? Stiff, dismissive, refusing to believe the wild stories these kids were telling them. He stopped trying to fix their performances and just filmed them as they were. The result is oddly effective. The cops don't sound like movie characters. They sound like real small-town officers who've heard too many pranks and false alarms. Their flat disbelief makes Steve McQueen's frustration more genuine, more relatable. When he's screaming about a monster and they're responding like he reported a stolen bicycle, the audience feels his helplessness. Sometimes bad acting is just bad acting, but sometimes, accidentally, it's exactly what the scene needs. Number 12. The diner sequence, where the Blob consumes the chef, was filmed in a real operating diner that stayed open during production. The producers rented the space for night shoots, agreeing to work between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. when business was slowest. But the diner never fully closed. Truckers and late-night workers would still wander in, looking for coffee and pie, only to find film lights, cameras, and a creature made of silicone devouring a screaming actor. Most just grabbed their food and left. A few stayed to watch, sitting in booths just out of frame while the crew filmed. One regular customer, a truck driver named Bill Morrison, watched the Blob attack scene so many times he memorized the dialogue. When the actor playing the chef kept flubbing his death scream, Morrison shouted from his booth, "Just scream and fall backwards! It's not Shakespeare!" The crew laughed. The director didn't. But Morrison's heckling actually helped. The actor loosened up, stopped overthinking, and delivered a perfectly terrified scream on the next take. The diner owner, initially annoyed by the disruption, realized the filming was bringing in curious customers who wanted to see a movie being made. Business actually increased during production. Years later, he'd tell anyone who'd listen that the Blob saved his diner from bankruptcy. The film crew brought attention, customers, and just enough money to keep the doors open through a rough winter. Number 13. Steve McQueen almost quit 3 days into filming. Not because of the script or the director, but because of the Blob itself. During a scene where the creature was supposed to ooze toward him menacingly, the silicone mixture malfunctioned and splattered across his face and chest. It was hot, nearly burning, and the dye immediately stained his skin bright red. McQueen exploded. He screamed at the effects crew, at the director, at anyone within earshot. He threatened to walk off set and never come back. His agent was called. A heated negotiation followed. McQueen demanded hazard pay, better safety protocols, and a guarantee that he'd never have to touch the Blob directly again. The producers agreed to everything. They had no choice. Without McQueen, they had no movie. From that point forward, a stunt double handled any scene requiring direct contact with the creature. McQueen would film his reactions separately, and the footage would be edited together. It worked seamlessly. Audiences never noticed the switch, but the incident changed the entire production. Safety became a priority overnight. The effects crew started testing the Blob's temperature before every take. Protective barriers were installed. Insurance was purchased. One actor's rage transformed a reckless set into something resembling professional. And McQueen stayed, finished the film, and never mentioned the incident publicly until decades later, when he could laugh about it. Number 14. The Blob had a different ending that nobody ever saw. After the creature is frozen and airlifted to the Arctic, the original cut showed a final scene set decades later. Scientists in a research station discover the frozen Blob, now labeled as an unknown specimen. One scientist suggests thawing it to study its cellular structure. Another agrees. The camera slowly zooms in on the ice as cracks begin to form. Cut to black. Roll credits. Test audiences hated it. They wanted closure, not a setup for a sequel nobody asked for. The studio executives agreed. They felt the cliffhanger was too dark, too too cynical for a movie that had ended on a triumphant note. So the ending was recut. The final shot became the frozen blob being dropped into the Arctic, followed by the famous title card, "The End," or "Is It?" It was cheesy, obvious, but it worked better than the extended sequence. The original ending footage was supposedly destroyed during editing, though rumors persist that it still exists somewhere in a forgotten vault. Some film historians have tried tracking it down, searching through studio archives and private collections. Nothing has surfaced. The alternate ending remains one of the Blob's lost pieces, a glimpse into what might have been if the filmmakers had committed to bleakness over hope. Sometimes, the right choice is the one that gets thrown away. Number 15. The film's promotional campaign was more creative than the movie itself. Theater owners were sent blob-shaped balloons filled with red jello and told to release them outside during screenings. Some theaters hired actors to dress in red bodysuits and roll through lobbies, pretending to be the creature. One theater in Philadelphia built a giant blob sculpture in their parking lot using chicken wire, papier-mâché, and automotive paint. It was 15 feet tall, cost over $300 to build, and the fire department made them tear it down 3 days later because it was blocking the street. Another theater in New York offered free admission to anyone who arrived covered head to toe in red. Dozens showed up wearing red clothes, red paint, red makeup. The lobby looked like a crime scene. The manager loved it. He called newspapers, got photographers to come document the chaos, and the story ran in the next day's edition. Free publicity that money couldn't buy. But the strangest promotion came from a drive-in theater in Ohio. They hired a crop duster to fly over the parking lot during the climactic scene and drop thousands of red balloons onto the cars below. It was supposed to be atmospheric, immersive. Instead, it was terrifying. Balloons hit windshields, blocked views, caused 3 minor car accidents. The theater was sued. The promotion was banned. But everyone remembered it, and that theater sold out every showing of The Blob for the next 2 months. Number 16. Annetta Corso, who played Jane Martin, almost got fired for refusing to scream on cue. She was a trained theater actress, serious about her craft, and she felt that constant screaming was demeaning and unrealistic. She told the director that her character wouldn't just shriek every time something scary happened. She'd think, react intelligently, maybe scream once or twice but not constantly. The director disagreed. This was a horror movie. The girl had to scream. That's what audiences expected. They argued for hours. Production shut down. The crew waited awkwardly while Corso and Yeworth debated character motivation and genre expectations in the middle of a small-town street. Finally, they reached a compromise. Corso would scream in critical moments, genuine terror scenes where screaming made sense. But in other scenes, she'd react with fear in subtler ways. Wide eyes, heavy breathing, backing away slowly. The director agreed, mostly because he was tired of arguing. The result made Corso's character more memorable. Jane Martin doesn't feel like a typical 1,950 seconds horror movie girlfriend. She's capable, brave, almost as proactive as Steve McQueen's character. She doesn't wait to be rescued, she helps with the rescue. And that depth, that complexity, came from one actress refusing to be reduced to a scream machine. Sometimes the best performances come from actors who fight for their characters, even when everyone else thinks they're being difficult. Number 17. The film's climax at the grocery store wasn't supposed to happen there. The original script placed the final confrontation at the town's high school, with the Blob consuming the building during a dance. But the school board refused to grant filming permission. They didn't want their building associated with horror, violence, or anything that might frighten children. The producers scrambled for alternatives. They needed a location with multiple rooms, lots of people, and a reason for characters to be trapped inside at night. Someone suggested a supermarket. Supermarkets were still relatively new in 1958, modern and exciting. The local grocery store manager was thrilled by the idea. He offered full access after closing, let them move products around, even suggested they use real fire extinguishers from his stock room. The location change improved the film. A grocery store felt more claustrophobic than a school gym, more everyday, more vulnerable. The Blob didn't attack teenagers at a dance anymore. It attacked normal people buying bread and milk. The mundanity made the horror more effective, and the frozen food section provided the perfect setup for the CO2 extinguisher solution. If they'd filmed at the school, that ending wouldn't have made sense. The location change forced a better resolution. Sometimes limitations don't hurt creativity, they sharpen it, forcing filmmakers to discover solutions they never would have found with unlimited options. Number 18. The Blob inspired a real scientific discovery completely by accident. In 1961, a biologist named Dr. Howard Lenhoff watched the film with his young daughter. During the scene where the Blob absorbs and digests a human body, his daughter asked how that was possible. Lenhoff, trying to explain fictional movie science, started researching real organisms that could dissolve and consume organic matter. He became fascinated by slime molds, particularly Physarum polycephalum, a single-celled organism that can grow, move, and even solve basic puzzles. His research, partly inspired by trying to answer his daughter's question about a B-movie monster, led to important discoveries about cellular behavior and intelligence. Lenhoff published several papers on slime molds, and his work influenced a whole field of study about primitive cognition. He always credited the Blob as his unlikely inspiration, though his colleagues thought he was joking. He wasn't. The film made him wonder what was scientifically possible, even if the movie itself was pure fiction. Decades later, Physarum polycephalum research would inform robotics, artificial intelligence, and our understanding of how intelligence can exist without a brain. All because one scientist took his daughter to see a cheesy monster movie and couldn't stop thinking about the question she asked in the dark. Science doesn't always come from laboratories and textbooks. Sometimes it comes from curiosity sparked by the strangest sources. Number 19. The film was banned in several countries for reasons that had nothing to do with violence or horror. In West Germany, censors rejected it because they felt the theme of unstoppable consumption was political commentary about communism spreading across Europe. In Spain, Franco's government banned it for promoting teenage independence and questioning adult authority. In several conservative U.S. towns, religious groups protested because they claimed the Blob was a metaphor for atheism, consuming faith and morality. The producers were baffled. They'd made a simple monster movie about space jelly eating people. They hadn't intended any political or religious symbolism. But once the interpretations started spreading, they leaned into it for publicity. Suddenly, The Blob was a controversial film banned overseas, which made Americans more curious to see what the fuss was about. Theater owners loved it. Controversy sold tickets. Whether The Blob represented communism, capitalism, nuclear anxiety, teenage rebellion, or just a hungry alien didn't matter. What mattered was that people were talking about it, arguing about it, buying tickets to decide for themselves. The bans backfired spectacularly. Countries that rejected the film created black markets where bootleg copies sold for ridiculous prices. The forbidden film became more popular precisely because it was forbidden, and the producers, who'd made a simple creature feature on a shoestring budget, watched in amazement as their movie became an international incident. Number 20. Steve McQueen never watched The Blob after it premiered. He attended the first screening, sat through the entire film, then walked out and never saw it again. Friends would ask about it over the years, especially as his career exploded with films like The Great Escape and Bullet. He'd dismiss it quickly, change the subject, make jokes about being too old to play a teenager. But privately, he had a copy of the film in his home. His wife found it years later, tucked away in a closet, the reel still in its original canister. She asked why he kept it if he never watched it. McQueen said it reminded him of where he came from, of being hungry and desperate. His wife found it years later, tucked away in a closet, the reel still in its original canister. She asked why he kept it if he never watched it. McQueen said it reminded him of where he came from, of being hungry and desperate, and willing to do anything for a shot at something bigger. The Blob wasn't the movie he wanted on his legacy, but it was the movie that gave him a legacy to build. It taught him that even embarrassing work could lead somewhere, that sometimes you had to take the ridiculous roles to get to the serious ones. When he died in 1980, that film canister was still in his closet, never opened after that first screening, a reminder that every career starts somewhere, even if that somewhere involves fighting silicone with a fire extinguisher while pretending to be 17. Bonus fact: The Blob still exists. Sort of. After filming wrapped, most of the silicone mixture was tossed, but one container survived. A collector found it in the 1,970 seconds and kept it sealed like a museum piece. Over decades, the red dye faded to brown, the silicone hardened into a cracked, brittle mass. Nothing like the oozing terror on screen. In 1988, he tried donating it to the Smithsonian. They declined. No historical value. He tried other museums, film archives, even Phoenixville where it was filmed. Nobody wanted it. He sold it to a Los Angeles horror shop for $500. It sat in a display case for years, unlabeled, just a crusty brown lump nobody recognized. The shop closed in 2003. The Blob vanished. Somewhere, in someone's storage unit or forgotten attic, the most famous monster of the 1,950 seconds is slowly decomposing in darkness. The thing that couldn't be killed on screen is dying quietly in the real world, and nobody's around to freeze it one more time.